There is purpose to everything. And yes, this would be the most controversial thing to ever say, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to say it anyway. There is reason behind suffering, loss, pain. And I'm simply going to have a conversation with you. I'm not telling you how to live. I'm just telling you what I perceived, what I've learned so far, what I've always come to know through the constant series of losing things. When things go down, when they break apart, you have to ask yourself why. And that's exactly the point. Suffering, bad things, force you to think, to look inward, to assess whether you are right in the situation or not, to actually contemplate the purpose of what is happening, the loss. You finally confront yourself, not being reckless anymore, but considering every single action that led up to the point. Now, there are many variations. There are things where are out of your control, but even when it's out of your control, how you perceive loss and suffering will determine whether that suffering increases or will repeat once again. We as people always live on cycles based on how we think. And when tragedy hits, it forces us to change how we perceive things. Our arrogance becomes humility. Our strength can become a weakness, or our weakness can become a strength in the same tragedy someone else is experiencing. All because of how you might have perceived it. So what is the point of suffering and loss or pain? I would consider 4 reasons, but there are plenty of them. But 4 will suffice for today. 1 is the lesson. Most of the time, things fall apart due to our own actions prior and a lack of analysis, of understanding. In our ignorance, we create towers that fall down. And when they do, we finally see who's the culprit. Now, at first, as a young person, you will blame everything. It's because I have this issue, or I have been diagnosed with this or with that. And even though those are obviously predetermined, and even events that you can't control are predetermined, how you respond to it is still your responsibility. Self-accountability is the lesson. That you are the author of your punishments and sufferings. And if you don't learn, then you will sabotage yourself again until you do. With loss, we are confronted. Sometimes it's not a lesson. Sometimes it's a punishment. Whatever you believe, if you break certain moral laws, eventually they will break you. It will come around. The energy you put out will return. Reap what you sow. And part of the punishment that comes back to you is exactly how you treated everyone in the past. In your selfishness, in your hurt and suffering, in your trauma. And since you refuse to learn the lesson, then comes the punishment. Then comes what I like to call acceptance, or to better understand letting go. Sometimes things will leave or rip apart from you suddenly, without warning. And it's not to punish you. And maybe there is a lesson in it, but sometimes there isn't. Except for letting go. Learning to let go. Learning that the constant obsession with attachment and control is not the only form to show love. Letting go is a form of love. And to let go doesn't mean to relinquish is not feel anymore. See, now that's the difference. People feel bitter when something's ripped from them. When they get a sudden loss, they lose a loved one. Because they never had the chance to express such emotions. So they either do one of two things. They emote, they pour themselves into something else to avoid their emotions, therefore increasing the suffering down the line, never truly healing, covering themselves in ego, while a void inside of them just gets bigger and bigger. And then they use what is external to fill that void continuously, never learning their lesson, constantly creating their own suffering without even being aware of it. Walking and living in pain and loss, and always anticipating that the next thing that comes by will abandon them. Acceptance is knowing, is experiencing every emotion and just allowing it to flow. Emotions are energy, and they demand to be addressed, to be acknowledged, and if you don't, they will come out in the most negative of ways, in ways you didn't expect them to. It's the equivalent of shaking up a soda bottle with a Mentos inside and not expecting it to blow the cap off at some point. Or when it is released, make a mess everywhere. It's how our emotions work. They're a flowing river and they need a direction. So feel the pain. Feel what you must. Cry, sorrow, anger. Allow it to be. It doesn't need an answer. It simply needs to be heard and loved back. And part of it is just observing what it is you're feeling and allowing it to happen. Part of healing is going through the needle of the eye, is going through the pain, suffering, and hell that is those emotions. And then on the other side, you learn the lesson of strength, mental fortitude. In spite of your handicaps, in spite of what was meant to be a reason to fail, now became a reason to be victorious. And now you have no more excuses to hold you back. Whatever loss it may be, physical, mental, spiritually, part of suffering is learning to overcome it. To understand that who you are inside doesn't have to yield and bend to the external. Your body might. Your mind might even fatigue. But your will, your soul, will not yield. And this is not something done overnight. It takes exercise. It takes experience going through these things continuously. No one likes pain. But pain teaches you what to avoid and also what to endure. It teaches you your limits and whether you want to overcome those limits or not. Suffering, loss, It is the catalyst to change. Change within you. And whether that's a good change or not depends on how you perceive it. And the change could happen in the most destructive and disturbing of ways. And often, it's not just a lesson, a punishment, or acceptance. And this is what I call the fourth one. Sometimes this loss out of nowhere, especially in a gruesome way, is a test. Do you give in to despair? Or do you step over it? It's easy to give in to the emotion of revenge, but it takes great power to forgive. If you liked the video, like and subscribe, and perhaps we'll talk on more tougher subjects.